Right, here we are. It's Friday. It's time for API storytelling. I am sans hat because my wireless headphones are not working. So here I am with the studio headphones, but it is what it is. Let me bring the gang in here and see what we got cooking this week. Hey, Aiden.
Hey, Ken. You should get the hat that's built into the microphone.
See, this is why you get paid the big bucks. Need to work on that. I'll get that. I think is a sombrero type. Like, oh no, I'll find things. Let's get Mike in here. Hey now.
Hey, good to see you, gentlemen.
I gotta move over, get center.
Yeah.
All right, there we are.
All right.
Everyone have a good week?
Yeah, actually, pretty good.
I can confirm that Ken exists in person, that he's not just like a deep fake. I saw him in real life.
That's right. So you have pictures?
No, we have pictures of our food. We don't have pictures of each other. We forgot.
We're out of practice this whole seeing thing in person, but we did enjoy a lovely dinner, and it was nice to see fellow human beings and friends. So good to see Aiden.
Very cool.
What do we got cooking this week, Aiden? I hear we got a cool guest that you might know something about.
Yeah, I know this guest pretty well. He's one of the co-founders of Optic, which is a company you may have heard of before. And he's actually the smartest person I've ever met on Craigslist. So introducing my co-founder, Dev Doshi.
Well, let's get him in here, but we're going to need some more detail on that Craigslist thing here. Let me get him in here. Hey, Dev.
Hey.
Hey, everybody.
All right. Good to see you.
Yeah, you too.
So who are you, Dev, and what's with this Craigslist thing? I want to know.
Yeah.
So I'm Dev, and I am a dev. And I met Aiden through Craigslist, Dev Seeking Devs. Well, it turned out I had left a startup in 2015, and I was looking for jobs, and through luck, Aiden had posted a little ad on Craigslist for some developer work, and I reached out and messaged them, and then one thing led to another, and then I was working with Aiden at JobSource.
What region did you post this in? Like, where was it? Local or was it national?
Yeah, it was local. It was Raleigh.
Huh.
Okay.
Yeah.
The other side of the story, though, was that our director of marketing was like, we should put an ad for this job on Craigslist. And I was like, that just seems like a terrible idea. Yeah. And he really fought me on it. Like, it was over $25, but we had a discussion about it. And then it ended up on there, and I got one response, which was from Dev, and I Googled Dev Doshi, and I thought it was a picture of this woman that popped up as the first 10 results. So that was what I was expecting. And then Dev showed up, and it was his birthday on that day. So we took him out to drinks after for his birthday. I think that sealed the deal.
There's a lot packed into that story.
Yeah. And it's just the beginning.
And his name was Tony before he started working there. He changed his name as part of it just so we could say that he's a dev who builds dev tools.
Is that it's all just part of the game.
Yeah. Branding is really important in this stage.
Yeah.
No, you gotta live it. You gotta breathe it. I'm with you on that one.
Yeah.
So
definitely.
So what do you guys do together? What's the relationship like at Optic? What are you roles and what do you guys work on each day?
I guess Aiden handles almost everything, and then actually I like to focus on the how we can make sure that everything that we talk about can be done by us and our team and the surrounding community and ecosystem. But often that's mostly just Aiden and I talking about stuff, and then we divide up all the responsibilities. Yeah, I don't know, Aiden. How would you say it?
I think we've never defined a relationship like talking about it out loud, especially from other people. But I like to think of you as the person that figures out how to make things real. And also, like, you are the first person I talk to about anything product related, because you're sort of like if the future was a person, you know what's going to happen and how it all is going to fit together, and you see 6 steps down the road. So I think your vision for like how we build Optic, like, I was like, oh, we need Git for APIs, but you're like, oh, well, here's how we would do that, and here's all these choices, like the spec that we built and all the different surrounding pieces. I think are from your mind, and it wouldn't be the same thing without the way we work together. However that is, which we should maybe write down and put on our website.
So I heard from Dev, I heard make sure you can do it, and then I heard from Aiden he makes it real, and then equating into a product. I think that's a pretty powerful relationship. I wish I had someone like you in my life.
Yeah, I think it's a great team.
He says that to his family too, and no one else is watching. At least I like to believe so. There was this one time when I took Dev to meet my mom. We have like all the common stories that you would have if you were dating, but for our co-founder relationship.
Yeah.
So it's one time I took Dev to meet my mom in Philadelphia, and he's really like a stand-up guy, so he decides to bring her a gift, but he doesn't clear the gift with me before. And my mom is allergic to only one thing in this entire world, and it is avocados. And Dev, for like a year, had been experimenting with hydroponic in homegrown avocados and had this whole rig set up, and all of these, like, he would like it'd be like, oh, Dev, how was your weekend? He was like, avocado thing. And like that's what he was doing in his spare time. So he like brings her these like magically in-house hydroponically made avocados, like a bunch of them, and she looks at them and like she's like, oh, I'm allergic. This was like a year of Dev's weekends though, and like he flew them to Philadelphia.
Right, and flying with these curiously shaped objects not the best idea.
That's smuggling from some states. You do
That's
that into
exactly
California, you're going to get in trouble.
Right.
Yeah.
And there's the whole avocado cartel too to worry about.
Yeah. Wait.
Yeah.
Okay. So I heard about.
So you're
pistachio.
fighting big avocado is what you're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Somebody's got to. That's like the one good thing about global warming is that like our climate zone in North Carolina might be more hospitable for avocados.
Or avocados at least.
Yeah.
Avocados and what? Figs.
I don't know. We do have figs right now. It's almost fig season or something.
Really? I didn't. Yeah. Okay. There you go. All right.
Yeah. It's like normally it's right around now, but I think the 2 fig trees that I've seen recently are not ready yet.
Cool. All right. Very good.
Well, I hear right now if you buy pistachios, there's probably like a 50% chance they're from an underground pistachio market. They're that illegal. There's been hijackings of entire pistachio trucks.
No.
And I guess the price has gotten so high that it's a pretty dangerous market to be in. So beware.
Be careful out there.
So let's veer back to API realm. You're a big thinker, Dev. That's when I first met you. I think how many times I met you in person? I remember the time at API World.
I think that was the only time.
Seems like there was another time.
And Vancouver. We met. It was like the conference run.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay,
it was like 2 in a row.
San Jose and then Vancouver.
Yeah, that's what it was. So it kind of all blended together. But you have some pretty big views, I would say, of the API space, which is at the intersection of making sure this shit is real and making sure we can do it. But I feel like how you see API specifications and what's possible or what we need to be done. I guess I don't want to make this too much about Optic, but I have this spectacle document open right now, which is a pretty grand view of what we should be doing and a healthy view of what we should be doing, I think. And so when it comes to what's broken, let's start with what's broken. When it comes to Swagger, Open API, and what you see out there right now, what's broken from your perspective, what's the biggest illness that we as companies and developers and people are doing when it comes to doing APIs?
I think there's a lot of things, but one when it comes specifically to these documentation or specs like OpenAPI and stuff, I think the main thing is that it adds this extra job to be done that's not the main job that we're trying to do. Like we're trying to build actual things, and ideally they would just work magically and interoperate and not need documentation and things. But as a result of other surrounding factors, then we need to have documentation, we need to have specs, but then we can't agree on what we want and what we're trying to do, and also we're trying to innovate too. So like you guys have talked about in past episodes, there's this tension between innovation and standardization, right? Standardization helps spread things, but then it also limits innovation because all the people need to adhere to that standard if they want to participate. But I think for me, the root of Spectacle is that we need to get together and align on what we actually want and what we're trying to do. And so the process by which Spectacle is created is a collaborative design process.
Well, and standardization is one way we can get together and agree what we want to do. But Aiden said something to me Wednesday night that I've been thinking about a lot is where part of the problem, and it was kind of 4 points, but you may have to correct me, Aiden. So that we're making this with the specifications, we're making them human and machine readable, and humans are kind of the problem. There is like we need them to be machine readable, so this will all be, we can automate it and the interoperability, and we all kind of have a common vocabulary.
Yeah.
So we just need to get rid of the people, right? Like it's like that's the problem here, is if we just got rid of the people, we'd be all right.
I think so.
Yeah, like the
Oh, go ahead.
I was just say the Harvard matrix we talked about on Wednesday. It's like everything important is 2x2 grids, obviously, because the world is now more complicated than that, and Harvard said so, so it must be true. But there's human readable, human writable, machine readable, and machine writable.
That's right.
And our contention is that if you optimize for anything on that square, it's at the expense of other things. So if you make specs more human writable, like with references, because no one likes to duplicate themselves and repeat themselves, you make it harder for the machines to read it, and you also make it harder for humans to read it. Like all of these things are trade-offs. So that's like the conniption we're in right now, is that Harvard matrix.
Yeah, so we've talked about some of this stuff before. I think I haven't had a chance to read all through Spectacle. I'm looking at it here right now too. I mean, what is sort of the driving element of what's in your head? I mean, so this idea about optimizing for, right? Because you have lots of audiences too. It isn't just readers and writers. It's specification authors, specification maintainers, tool implementers for the specification. So there's a whole bunch of implementations for the tooling around editing, reading, and then there's also just the consumers, like the consumers of the result of the specification. That affects how that specification works as well, right? So, I mean, how do you think about the space? And I mean, it seems, rather bold to say, well, I have, one ring to rule them all, right? It's like, so how does that work? What's the ecosystem like? What's the thinking around that?
Yeah, and so I think Spectacle tries to not know what is right, and instead be able to evolve over time to meet the needs that people surface. So like I said before, it's a collaborative design process. I am a big proponent of the domain-driven design community, but basically figuring out what we're trying to do and making sure that we can do all those things. But the technical bit is, like Aiden said, making sure that we're not trying to do that all in one representation that tries to rule them all, right? And so that's the key bit, is keeping each use case separate, but and choosing an evolvable mechanism inside that can be modified by people to meet the needs that it doesn't meet, and to not overly combine unrelated concepts. For example, in Swagger, you could think of an API as just an API, but there's also a concept of a server that is running that API, and they're not fundamentally related. And so there's a burden on the spec committee to think about the actual server, whereas that's only relevant in a subset of the cases that people are using the documents for.
Right. I mean, it goes even further than that, right? So one
Yeah.
of the things that's pretty common in the way I think about this is you have sort of the design, the abstract, right? And then you've got the sort of the class that you implement off the abstract, right? So I have this abstract idea of a service. So then I make a design for a service, and then I have an instance of that design, an instance of that implementation, right? So it's like turtles all the way down. So each one of those has a different focus or a different viewpoint.
Right.
So there's the implementer's view, there's the designer's view, there's the user's view, So I think one of the things that strikes me by what you're talking about is this notion the collaborative space is actually what you're designing. You're designing the collaboration,
Yes.
not necessarily the things that live inside. It's actually like you're talking about the problem space rather than the solution space, and letting others sort of act inside that space. You can think of this as there are all sorts of sort of creative installation game experiences, right? Artists do these kinds of things where you go in this room and you have to kind of figure. It's like, what is the thing that's really popular now? Escape room stuff, right?
Yeah.
So designing a space where there's lots of challenges, lots of things you could do, lots of things that interconnect with each other that are related, and then placing humans in it, placing creativity in it might be an interesting strategy.
Yeah, exactly. And that's a lot of what domain-driven design is about, is figuring out these things, what are the boundaries between things, and who are the stakeholders that care about a certain thing. So who's doing code generation using API descriptions, and who's doing documentation websites, and maybe there's a relationship between the two. Maybe you should be able to just go to a docs website and with one click have a client or server running in some infrastructure, right? I think there's a lot of things that people are trying to do, and because we have to focus on this other layer of problem, we're not even able to progress to the actual level that we want the user experience to be.
Well, the concept of an API as an escape room, I'm going to hang on to that one and put that on the shelf, because I think that's very appropriate. We got to think about that one a lot more.
Oh, very media friendly too.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And one of the things that I hope, I mean, I'm optimistic about things like Spectacle, but is helping us think beyond just HTTP and in that server binding us, forcing us to think about the server too much. I think we end up thinking about HTTP too much, and we're not going to be able to healthily move to HTTP 2 or 3, or healthily move to MQTT or other things. And so I'm hopeful that we can our tooling can help bridge all of this, and we can stop thinking about all this a lot more, because I'm getting tired of talking specifically about HTTP.
Oh yeah.
But
I agree so much, and I find that a lot of people have this misconception or something that's very easy to understand how it came to be, but that the API is their domain model. And in fact, it should be the other way around, right? You derive your API, and in fact, you could auto-generate many different forms of APIs for a given domain model, and support all of them if you wanted to.
Yeah, and I agree 100%. I get more nervous by the day, actually. So HTTP, we've had some version of that for close to 30 years, right? And it turns out actually MQTT came out around about the same time. And it was really designed from, solving from a different design point. But certainly these are, in my mind, these are not going to last another generation. There are going to be other things, other ways to solve problems. We're going to need a lot of creative thinking as we expand out. We're getting to the point where we've got computers flying around on Mars, okay? That's a totally different set of challenges that we need to compute for and design for and think about. And it's only going to get more complex, more challenging. So the way we're doing things now, where everything is, sort of instantaneous and all that kind of stuff, is not going to work. So we're going to have a lot more. What I would love to see are design spaces that allow people to start thinking about that in those kinds of ways. How can I implement this so that an orbiting vehicle can interact with this service? And there are protocols that do that already. We've got the Licklider protocol. I haven't seen any. It's very, very early, but I haven't seen any implementations on that. So there are lots of possibilities. So designing things now with that kind of eyeball, that kind of horizon, I think can be super, super powerful.
So
For
what is a so I'm working through my thoughts on Spectacle, the pros and cons, and as a lofty idea to kind of shift things forward.
Mhm.
And I'm always I love thinking through these, and I love seeing the positive, but then I hit up against the realities of the space, and people are, businesses, people are very proprietary. People, the API space talks a good talk when it comes to interoperability and standards. And then when it comes to the actual implementation, nobody cares about interoperability and reliability and all of this. And so what is the most meaningful thing that is it tooling? Is it what could be done with Spectacle that would make this so for me, spectacle, the word means several different things. It could be something good, it could be something bad. But what would get people's attention that this approach would matter and help kind of stabilize things? It's a big question, I know.
Yeah. I think sometimes you just have to do it, and people seeing that it is able to achieve its goals is the best proof, I guess.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, what are the goals? I mean, let's just get right to it. What is this going to make different?
So in contrast to an ecosystem that takes a long time to evolve and doesn't meet everybody's needs and is hard to contribute to and understand the history of, I would like an ecosystem where it's easy to find tools that work and stay up to date, that meet all our various needs, such as generating documentation and code and validation tools and things that help you understand the API better, or analytics of understanding how people are using your API. Right? There's so much of this that if people do follow basic patterns, then they can get for free, and then we can focus on the next layer of problems and things that we want to do.
Well, and
I think the other.
Oh, go ahead, Aiden.
I think another piece of it too is actually allowing the ecosystem to evolve. So right now, putting something new in Open API or JSON schema is a process, and vendors have kicked back sometimes about how long it's going to take to implement a new feature or who it's going to break, and the whole thing about the point release versus the 4.0. Like, those are conversations you have to have when your core abstraction isn't evolvable. When you sort of build the evolvability into the system, and everything the users access is through a query, and everything that they change about the spec is through a mutation, you can create a stable interface like that won't have to change, even if the underlying thing is getting richer in functionality. So it's almost like, in a way, we're talking about building an API for API specs. That's what Spectacle is at the highest level. I don't think we defined it yet. And we're telling people, don't look behind the curtain. The spec part doesn't matter. Focus on the API, which is what the whole community says all the time about everything. And that's how we want API specs to evolve going forward, is here's the API. It's never going to break because all this information is always going to be there. But we can add new projections and new endpoints that will give you new information as the spec gets richer. And if people want to have these new meta fields and overlays and other kinds of things that don't exist in there today, there's a path forward to add that without ever having to break older versions. And I think that's one of the things that slows the space down so much, because we have to think about the past, and we have to think about the past more than we think about the future. And if you want something to evolve quickly, you want to be thinking about the future more than the past. And that's what the whole proposal is built around. And proof is already an optic. We started using Spectacle internally for our API spec over the last 2 months, and we've been adding more features than we ever have at a pretty fast velocity. And some of that's just because our team is bigger and we've learned how to work together better. But a lot of it is because when we have to add a new feature, we just add a new Spectacle query. And it's been a lot easier to think about that than it is to think about rebuilding a spec.
Right.
So is this like a kind of a pace layering, like a Stewart brand kind of things move at different speeds thing, or is this something else entirely?
I'm not sure about the context, so maybe you want to go into that more.
So I mean, what typically happens in a large ecosystem, right? In a complex ecosystem, whether it's, physical or virtual, biological, there are things that happen at different speeds. Like fashion happens at a pretty fast speed, but evolving life happens at a really slow speed, you know.
Yeah.
So there are all sorts of things. There are different paces that go on, and when you start working in large organizations, you realize some things can happen quickly. They can be localized, and be kept away from other things. And there's a blast radius problem. Other things take a long time. Culture takes a longer time to change than fashion, right? I can change the decor much easier than I can change behavior. So you learn in complex systems that certain things need to be more stable. So I can build on other things. I can be faster up here because I'm slower down here. So now I'm hearing you talk about this idea about speeding things along without breaking, I guess is the message I'm hearing. Is that based on the notion that certain things are at different levels, or is it based on something else? I mean, is it based on the notion that you have an observability or an ability to see that maybe we don't now? Like, classically, behaviorally, I don't change code, I write on top of it because I don't know what the old code's doing. So I want to break anything, I want to leave it. Right. So there's a couple of different notions there, right? So does that ring true? Can you give me a sense of what? Yeah.
So I think but if we analyze what is changing or what do we want to be able to change quickly, what are the bits that are hard to change in the current way? That's like a good clue. And so with Spectacle or with specs in general, there's a standardization body, and people need to understand a lot of different things to create this one spec. But in reality, we're not actually building one spec. We're building a set of use cases and a set of and then like more technical subsets of how to do each one of those. And they're all independent, but they're all related. That might be a confusing thing to say, but
no, yeah.
Right, they're all about APIs, but there's no reason why the people who are building code generators need to care too much about the other things that are going on in the space. So we're decreasing cognitive load on each individual use case, but still letting them interoperate and build on each other. Right, there's no reason why they should be all bundled into one spec, and no less one spec that is representing something that we would call a graph, or we know there's things are interrelated and not hierarchical, but then we're trying to represent it as a tree. And then when you need to like make a change to one conceptual thing, you might need to edit multiple parts of the tree, right? And that just basically makes things super complicated. What's simpler is to represent every change as a change in a change log, and then change how you look at the spec or whatever view you want to take about the spec. What are the endpoints? What are the shapes of the data that I'm sending? What are the names of all the fields in my API if I'm trying to build something that assesses the consistency of my API? Right? So there's all these different things all these different questions you might ask about an API that don't really depend, or you don't need to depend too much on the underlying representation. For example, if you just want to create a dynamic API, you could use Spectacle and have code running behind Spectacle rather than a static file, and it could just be this dynamic API that responds to what you ask about it. It doesn't have to be static anymore.
So I mean, this is really fascinating to me. So is Spectacle a foundational element, a middleware approach, a interface approach? What is it that's really going on?
Yeah, I think the units of exchange become each individual query or consumer of queries. Though that's where more of the magic is happening, or the things that people are doing should be on those ends, and the ways that people want to change their specs can happen through any tool, but go through the mutations. So basically, if you're building code generation, there should be some query or set of queries that you could use to ask questions that are relevant to generating code, such as you care about the shapes and the endpoints, and maybe there's a concept of flows. So a lot of APIs are lower level APIs that are meant to be composed into flows by consumers, and maybe those flows should be part of your documentation. But that could also be automated, right? When you use a tool like Optic, you can say that these 3 requests are a sequence, and the parameter of this one goes into this one, right? And that's its own layer that's on top, but it should be composed, it should be independent. But tools like SDK generators should be able to use those and auto-generate the flow code for you too, right? But
I think
to care about the flows, right?
I think a metaphor I've used for this in the past that's helpful is to think about what you guys do when you look at an open API spec or a JSON schema. You don't, Kin maybe, but most of us don't just open those for light reading. Like we have a very specific task that we're trying to accomplish when we open one of those files. So I might be trying to figure out what are all the required fields for this object. And I open it up and I use my brain as like the RAM and the program, and I use the spec as like my reference to know what to look for. And I compute what the required fields are. Or if I'm writing a parser that's going to generate code, I'm writing code that's doing that task for me. The contention is that specs themselves are just data formats. Like we don't, when you submit a paper to a conference, they don't know about Word or Microsoft Word, DocX. No one knows what the innards of that looks like, who's reading your paper. And you as the writer of the paper don't know what DocX looks like, but it's doing something useful under the hood. And maybe one day I'll read the spec for DocX, but I have no intention to ever learning that. But the same thing could be said about specs. Like when you open that file, whether you're a computer with a job to do, a tool like Postman, or a human trying to learn how to write to the API, we're all looking for one particular thing. So why not just pull that out anyway? And that's what like doc sites are doing. That use case of rendering a nice Swagger UI is making the things that are important obvious. And the contention is that's what the spec should be. There should be these queries built on top of it. And we just think of specs as facts and questions. There are things you can say about the specs. These are like the mutations, like this new field now exists, this field doesn't exist anymore. And there are questions you can ask, which is at this point in time, in this deployed environment, how does this API work? And that's what you really want out of your specification. You don't want just the file format, because then you have to do all the other work around the edges to build the workflows and to build the tools that work with that file format, instead of getting to the meat of what people actually care about, which are these use cases.
And back to the ecosystem thing, part of the design choices that we made of using GraphQL and stuff was to allow extension in a polyglot way, whereas in the open API ecosystem, you run into this problem where there's a Ruby implementation or there's a couple of Ruby implementations, but you don't know which subset of open API they support, and then if you're not using Ruby, then like you have to learn Ruby or integrate Ruby into your stack or something, right? And that may not be a fair thing to ask of everybody. But behind GraphQL and GraphQL Federation, you can kind of seamlessly put a facade up in front of whatever is happening behind the scenes and make it easy to have interoperability. And in GraphQL, you have extension points in the resolvers. So if somebody wants to add a field to a query, that can happen without affecting anything else. And only the consumer that knows to talk to that federated GraphQL server that's composing this new data will get that new data.
So how does this relate to Tim Berners-Lee's resource description frameworks, RDF? Is this basically sort of heading in the same general direction?
I think that's a big question, but I think there's a lot of similarities between GraphQL and these hypermedia formats, right? We're traversing a graph and we want to be able to do that. And I think GraphQL presents a really nice user experience on top of it. I would argue a lot of the RDF things are kind of the same situation. Maybe not everybody needs to learn RDF to get the value out of RDF. And like, you know, formative story for me, I started programming when I was 10, and like that was when the semantic web was the next big thing, and it still hasn't happened yet. I think the W3C working groups that are doing the IoT web of things, I think that they're probably doing the coolest work in that sense, but it's still like not very accessible.
But I just mean in the sense that, you know, RDF is really graph, right?
Yes.
It's really this notion that there's a graph and there's a way to reason about what you see here, and there's a way to extend it through vocabularies and so on and so forth. So even though there may not be any implementation relation at all, you know, there's been this long thread of thinking, you know, of using graph thinking all the way, you know, to the Neo4js and all these other kinds of things. This is a long and storied history. So So what I'm really fascinated about what this makes. There's a phrase I use: safe, cheap, and easy. Right? I want it to be safe for me to do something, so that I don't go, oh crap, I just deleted the database. Right? It should be hard for me to do something stupid. I want it to be cheap. I want a low barrier of entry. I don't want to have to be buying a lot of equipment or learning a lot, like doing a lot of value exchange in order to get started. In other words, I've got to install a bunch of stuff, whether it's Kubernetes or Apollo or whatever the case may be. And I want it to be easy. In other words, I don't want it to be, you mentioned this, cognitive load, right? I don't want to have to be a priest or a rocket scientist in order to solve the problem that I have in front of me, whatever that problem might be. I sort of am of the reverse of the Einstein thing. There's the Einstein attribution. The problems that we've created, you need a different brain in order to create the solutions, right? If you're using the same thinking that created the problem, you may not get to the solution. I'm sort of the reverse. I'm sort of like whatever problem that I can conceive is limited by, my ability. So don't give me tools that require me to be smarter in order to solve the problem I just thought of. So safe, cheap, and easy is always a motivator for me. Behind the scenes, there could be 1,000 squirrels. I don't really care. People working really, really hard. There's this gigantic, virtual Turk behind it. That's cool. As long as it's safe, cheap, and easy for me, I think I can get somewhere, right? So that's sort of the next thing that sort of plays into this. Is that how does this make things? Does it make things safer, easier, cheaper?
Yeah, I guess I would argue. I would argue for that. Yeah. So safer, as in safer and easier in the sense that you only have to worry about the one thing you're changing, and have more confidence that it won't blow up other things, and that it is specialized for the use case that you're trying to do. So you don't have to incorporate knowledge of these other things that are unrelated, and should take you less time. And I think especially with the GraphQL tooling, they've been doing great work in making the graphical viewer to interact with GraphQL, and there's other competing ones too, and there's better authoring tools for GraphQL as well. And I think it's great when you embrace the concept of a graph at the top level, and don't have to worry as much about HTTP, where it's not enforced that things are a graph. It's harder to build tooling. Sometimes we talk about Optic as some parts of Optic as being like the Apollo GraphQL for REST APIs or something, because when users can use Optic functionality to indicate that this field is an ID of a user resource or something, right? And then you can build that graph from that, or this field is a relation to this other thing. And so people can add those layers of knowledge on, but in GraphQL, it's kind of for free. Yeah.
So,
cool.
And there's other things too about when you do have this GraphQL server and you give it fixed inputs, you can snapshot test it and make sure that it's the same for all the implementations, right? Or just automated tests that show you the implementation level of each implementation, or the coverage of each implementation. This implementation doesn't do this thing, and I don't see that in the OpenAPI ecosystem. Something where you can just say this Ruby one will let me work with OpenAPI 3.1 files and can handle when the files are split up by path references or something. Right? Often you'll start using a tool, and if the first tutorial it's so simple, you have these 10 lines of YAML, right? But then then by the time you get to the thing that you're actually trying to do, it doesn't support that, and you've already invested all this time in, and then you don't know where to go to actually do that, right? And it's the more you can know up front whether this thing is going to work or not.
Yeah. I mean, there's I'm gonna let I'm gonna let Ken talk in just a second. Let me just say one more thing. So there's one thing. There's the initial investment experience, right? It's so easy. That's great. I love that. I'm up and running in 5 minutes. But then there's this sort of the gap, right? There's the chasm between the demo and my problem. There's always a chasm there, right? And it'd be great if I knew earlier on whether or not I'm going to actually be able to, Evel Knievel this canyon or not.
Right.
I'm really not going to make it. It's really. So that's definitely a plus, right? If you can give me things that sort of tell me ahead of time, you want to go over here instead, right? You lead me in the right direction. At the same time, like there's just tons and tons of cases where I don't always know where I'm ending up, right? I want to be able to kind of keep the expense, the investment, that value exchange small all the time, and kind of walk along. So I definitely want to see. There's a sort of a mixing. Conway talks about this difference between programming machines and programming applications. He uses that phrase. Programming the machine is very tedious, and you need some really smart people, engineers, for that. Programming the application should be easy. It should be something that I can do, as just a regular sized person, and figuring out where those things lie, because those are two different worlds, right? Designing an ecosystem is very different than participating in an ecosystem, right?
Right. Yeah. So I think the two need to work together. People who are participating are helping to design it, and creating this like marketplace of saying people want this, but there's nobody doing it yet, so it hasn't been built. So somebody like, and then it's a little more clear what the separation of concerns are. Like somebody needs to say like what questions do we need to ask and what data needs to come out of it to build the tool, right? So you can operate in a hypothetical space, build the thing that you're trying to build with mock data, right? And then say, how can we get that data out, right? So it's two different responsibilities.
Yeah, and tool building is very different than solution building, right? That's one of the other stories from Conway, right? Is building something that can interact in the ecosystem, that understands how T cells work, is very different than building a solution that can find food and survive. So those are also very different levels.
Yeah, and this happens in communities too. Like, oftentimes we donate projects to communities to make them more open and to make them a standard. But consequence of that is the design process that was being followed before that made the thing successful overnight changes into a committee decides what to do next. And there is a correlation between something becoming a standard in public and it declining rapidly. Like that, it happens half the time, 7 times out of 10. It's greater than half, I think. And the velocity of these things slow down. And there's we take these as like presumptions that like this is just the way it will be. It's the cost of success, and it doesn't have to be that way if you make the system evolvable from day one. But I think what happens is a lot of us don't think about like what will happen what if we do complete the jump and now we're on the other side of the canyon? Like, did we bring enough food? Do we have a way to get back? Like,
well, usually, in biological systems, you make the jump, you didn't bring food, and you die. The next one brings food. Right. A fundamental I have this topic that I have never had the courage to fill out, and the theme of this keynote topic is the most effective training tool is death. The ones that survive are the smart ones, and it takes a lot of time. So that's a very dark story. But what you're talking about in terms of the ones that die off, right? The specs that die off, the ones that don't have momentum, the ideas that never make it off the table. This, are we going to say that we're going to beat that? That's a bold statement, right? That's a really bold statement. I think it's probably a more accurate statement to say that we've been trying this enough that we're confident that we will make the jump, and this time we'll bring food, right? I think that's what's really happening.
Yeah, and to some extent, the most intellectually honest thing that we can say is that we don't know the requirements of everything that people are doing with specs, and so that's the problem that I am focused on: is how do we make that the easy thing to change, right?
Yeah, surviving, right? Yeah, that's really what it is. Like you survive.
Yeah. If it was easy to change OpenAPI, it would have ended up with event-based systems inside of it. But it's not easy to change OpenAPI. So we have async API and other tools, and the next paradigm will have another tool. The next paradigm will have another tool until it can be about messages, and the protocols are a detail inside of the specification. But we don't build things that way right now. And I think that's sort of
Well,
what
it's very hard to build things that way. Nature doesn't build things that way either. Nature builds open API, and then it doesn't work anymore, so that nature builds async API, right? And then somebody finally is able to subsume those in some other creature. That's the way it works. It doesn't start out being everything, right? It starts out being one thing, and it survives as long as it can, and it spawns others. So, I mean, that's basically what you do. That's really what you do.
But you can build a system with runtime adaptability. Like that's what the brain is.
Yeah.
It's allowing the same DNA. I'm gonna stop talking because I feel like I interrupted Ken again. But that's what the brain is. That's what like runtime operating is. And if you can build, if your goal is we are going to help version and understand all of these relationships between companies that are mediated by these data flows and these APIs, then that can be the foundational premise of it, and you can build the system to be evolvable. And like there's costs to things dying every 2 years, which is that things move slowly and we don't build better things. And the fact we already have the tools for the one thing anchors us from, trying the next thing. So I think if you want to make an ecosystem better, you should focus on how to make the units in the ecosystem adaptable and evolvable. And that's how you actually solve problems in the long run, instead of just betting on, well, eventually there'll be a better horse or whatever the thing is. Like, are we going to breed stallions, or are we going to make a Ford Motor factory that can build a new kind of car every year? And it's choices.
Yep, definitely.
So I was engineered to be evolvable. So like I've had like 8 questions, and then now I'm like I forgot them all because they were just not good questions.
Oh.
And so like now I'm on this question is, so what makes me excited about Spectacle, and when Aiden first explained it to me, is the ability to ask questions.
Mhm.
But a long time ago, I realized I stopped giving a shit about implementation questions because I don't own any production. I'm interested in the meta, domain and industry. I'm interested in like knowing that people are jumping motorcycles over canyons, and then showing up and being the really drunk guy in the parking lot going, bring food, with the sign, like bring food, because like I know like the last 3 guys died over there, and like everyone's just lining up to jump, and so like that's who I am. And so those are the types of questions that I want to be asking, is those meta level, like, hey, people are generating code, or hey, people are doing traceability over here, or hey, people stopped jumping and they started swimming, because swimming proved to be a much better way to actually get across the canyon. And I'm like, oh wait, there's some weirdos building some bridge thing, I don't know what it does down the way. And so that's what I like paying attention to. But I need a place I can go ask questions. And like Twitter, how did I used to ask questions? RSS feeds used to be how I asked questions, or got notified of things that are happening. Twitter kind of usurped that and replaced that. But I'm being squeezed out of Twitter because of rate limits and business models and things like that. So like, I need a place that I can ask these meta level questions, and that's what I'm hoping for. But back to the cognitive load, and when Dev said, we need everyone to get on board with this, it's everybody is tooling makers, right? Like we need a first wave of tooling providers who are going to make that drag and drop interface for my data model, so I can stop thinking about Swagger Open API, because I feel like we're hitting the point of diminishing returns with convincing people that Open API is worth reading and worth paying attention to.
Right.
So
if we're doing it right, nobody should even necessarily know about Open API at the consumer level.
Right? Yeah. Right? Open API should be an output, not an input. That's the way I think about it. And here's what I want. Just talk about what I want. I want a tool that generates a data model from my API. We got a whole bunch of tools that do it the other way.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Give me a data model, give me an API. I want the other one.
So that sounds to me like an interactive wizard that would ask you questions about what you're trying to do, and what does that need? Do I need to
maybe I give it an API design, and it says, here's your data model.
Yeah. No, this is where I'm at with my API first, because I'm constantly like questioning my reality, and like API first is my reality right now. So I'm like, hey, what is this API? It makes no sense. Like, what is it? And in Postman speak, I start with an API. I hit create API, and it's like a basic schema, JSON schema with one path and an info and description. And then I add my model, my properties to the model. I add my endpoints, parameters, and then I publish a mock server, and I publish documentation and invite my team, and we iterate on that open API.
Yeah.
The problem is nobody on my team gives a shit about that open API or knows how to read the open API.
Right.
Like back to what Aiden said, like, I love writing in open API. I actually have a poetry book I'm writing right now called the API Economy, where every poem is written in open API. But actually validating handwritten open API on paper has proven to be very difficult. So anyway, that's another conversation. But how I'm flipping
we're not building handwriting validation into Optic, just so you know up front. I'll just say that right now.
With that I thought it was like OCR.
Yeah.
Okay, never mind. But so my API first model is now I'm like, okay. From that, I generated a Postman collection, which a Postman collection allows me to use the mock and see the documentation. And now it's like my API first thing is tangible. But because no one cares about open API on my team, I'm like, okay, well, I'll just start with a collection. And when you hit create collection, all you get is a title and a description. And you have the ability to add requests and endpoints and all the other details. And then and then I can generate an open API from my collection and go the other way. But I want Copilot, I want to be able to write my name and description, and I want it to start fleshing out my endpoints and my parameters and go find my schema.org model. Because in the other one, schema.org, sorry,
Whatever.
The wording sometimes in my head, but I want to drag, I want the motorcycle jumping schema from schema.org, which there is one. And
how wide is the chasm?
Yeah. And I want to drag over canyon. I want motorcycle. I want, flashy suits, full leather suits and helmets. So I'm dragging over all my models, but I want to go the other way. I want to go jumping motorcycles over canyons and write a little description and then have it just tell me my model. And then I want it to know, like, hey, this should be event driven. Like there's certain events that you care about when you're like hit the ramp, when you like hit the other side, and then like there's certain events you're going to care about. So I want that reverse version of that.
Right. We have that for gaming, right? We have things where the physical models can be imported, and all I have to do is turn on and tweak a few knobs, and now things bounce correctly, and there's what level of gravity there is. We built these into that space of programming, that space of creating interactive models, right? We need to see the same kinds of things for the kinds of models, kinds of systems we model.
Which are entirely made
to me. Yeah.
Right.
But there are still there are still rules that you can bring in, right? You can there are physics of data, there are physics of interactions, and so on and so forth. And I'd love to see us doing the kind of thing that Ken's talking about, which is, I'll take a little of this, take a little of this. It's going to explain to me, that's out of parameter, that's way out of line. You're not going to be able to pull that off. I change the little guidelines, and then all of a sudden, it's an interactive system. All of a sudden, I can start to do transactions here. Now, it may be mocked at first, right? And then I press an F5 and it generates a bunch of things. But that's another thing that I think we really are missing. And that may be where you're going. But I'm just saying, I don't have a play space. I still, to use, Ken's mentioned this, and now, Aiden's mentioned it too. I have to use this REPL in my head an awful lot. It reminds me, this dates me, but when I was writing COBOL kids, when I was writing for minis and mainframes, we didn't have a lot of screen time. So I had to spend all this time hand writing this thing and thinking truth tables in my head to make sure that the one time I got the chance to run it, the 3 or 4 minutes I got at midnight on the priority scale, that it wouldn't just blow up on me. I had to do all the work ahead of time to prevent bad things from happening, right? So what I wanted was a play space, and an interactive play space for APIs would be fantastic.
Yeah, and I think Aiden and I sometimes talk about this concept called the capability registry. So I think the seeds of it were from a service catalog. Like a lot of customers want a service catalog for all the APIs in their organization. But the thing is, like we said before, the API is not the domain model or the business model, right? The business is this whole surrounding thing full of people and things that aren't encoded in your API, right? So the capability registry includes everything. And in fact, you can imagine there's we don't have to use JSON for APIs. You could send a request that says whatever you want in English, and then there can be a hypermedia response that asks you for a clarification, right? Or a human in the loop, right? There's a lot of cool tools now like temporal.io that make it easy to have human in the loop API workflows. I think that should be the direction that we go. Like instead of focusing on how we think we should build our API, let's let consumers ask for what they want, and then we'll do the work to interpret every different representation, or say we don't know, or ask questions, right? It's kind of like the API is kind of limiting the language that's available to use to talk about a problem. And if you don't start with that premise, or you don't assume the language or of the structure of the problem or anything, then you're probably going to get better results. Somebody sends you a request that is entirely unrelated to what you do, you can just tell them that, rather than them having to scour your documentation, right?
Sure. Yep.
So this is what I want. I want a spectacle. This is the first tooling or thing is I want a play space like Mike asked for. I want it to be a circus tent, so that we can maybe not jumping canyons. Maybe we just start with like jumping lions or something, And I want to be able to do anything in this circus tent. I want to be able to add any model. I want to be able to manage the medical tent. And I want the medical tent to be like fire compliant. And tell me when I'm like, gotta triage the first person that misses jumping the lion or something and gets hurt. That like, all right, you just created a new model, but there's this whole like domain over here that you should be thinking about, because like the circus healthcare industry is very heavily regulated and you can't mess around. And so like, but I want a circus tent that like helps me create my little circus, So whoever's watching this, if you want to build something on Spectacle, like that's the first thing I want. So,
There you go.
And stay tuned, because that's basically what Optic is going to be becoming
a circus
in coming months as we evolve. Not a circus. I mean, it's a fun place I think it's a fun place, but just this idea that it is like we're hyped on the relationships between teams, and helping people figure these things out. So like for us, this is a first class concern, saying what I care about to another team and having them tell me which API they've built that does that, is really important, because ultimately at the end of the day, like APIs are cool, but they are encoding relationships between teams. They're how I bring your product into my product, and like that's what we're trying to manage with Optic, not making APIs this two-way syncable thing between real world and the specification and supporting your design use cases. It's really about, at the end of the day, all of that is for the sake of these relationships. So I think these play spaces like help us get there.
Yeah, good
Cool.
stuff. So we'll get to work on that circus tent for Spectacle. We're at time. We just kind of that was crazy. That was a crazy ride. It started just a little bit slow, but then like by like 20-25 minutes into it, we were just like, we just got really out of hand there. That was good.
Get me started.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Well, we're gonna have to do this again, Dev. I think we're gonna have to find ways of getting you back in here, and because I know we all got lots of crazy ideas, and like seriously, if we could come up with a circus tent, I'd be happy to be the ringmaster for like all these crazy ideas.
There you go.
To the tables. So
I was going to say you've got the hat for it, but you're not wearing your hat today.
Yeah, that's dumb. Like
there we go. Yeah. All right, that looks good. Yeah. That looks good.
Yeah, I'll work on that.
We got to close the episode out with that now.
Yeah, that's it. Okay, we're done.
Now I got to get a haircut though, because my headphones aren't working. But that's another story. Alrighty, well, thank you, Dev, for joining.
Thanks for having me.
Really appreciate you being here.
Yeah, looking forward to next time.
All right, have a good weekend.
You too.
Cheers.
See you, Dev.
That was crazy. That was fun.
Yeah, so that's every day for me, just to give you guys perspective.
It is a circus.
It is.
I love it.
Yeah, no. I love him. that's every day.
Yeah.
I'm very lucky that that's my everyday.
Yeah. I mean, I
Yeah.
feel like if we had Spectacle in place and had this proper layer, he would have never brought those avocados to your mom because he would have had some insight into what's going on. So
Nice
He
callback.
claimed, and he stands by this, that he wasn't trying to kill her, but that's still TBD.
okay.
I'm not sure.
Yeah.
We have no evidence one way or the other.
That's right. This will come out later, I'm sure.
All right. Well, I'm going to let you go first, Aiden, but good to see you this week, my friend, and have a good weekend.
See you.
All right, see you guys. Bye, Mike.
All right.
All right. Well, that was fun. And thank you for your episode of Breaking Changes this week, sir. That was a blast.
Oh yeah,
I
had a great time talking with you. Hopefully it was interesting, and I'm looking forward to lots more episodes. Every time I get a chance to dip into these episodes, I'm having epiphanies left and right. So you're doing a fantastic job. Thanks for doing all that, and thanks to Postman for doing that too. I know that's a lot of work. It's good.
I'm enjoying it, but thank
Cool.
you. Have a good weekend, and we'll see you next week.
See ya.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.
All right, that was a blast. That was good. That's exactly what I envision API storytelling being about. So, everyone, have a good weekend. We'll see you next time.